Hello and welcome to the Security Experience. I'm Bill Daniel and I'll be your host on this journey as we champion best practices for delivering enterprise security solutions projects. That sounds a mouthful already. This will be, I hope, a bi-weekly broadcast with guests, and we have one waiting to be introduced here very shortly, from all levels, disciplines from around the world, sharing their experiences, input and insight into these sort of projects from inception, planning, delivery, ongoing operational use, and of course maintenance at the end. So as this is the first episode, and I apologize for reading some of this because, otherwise I'll forget bits, but it'll get more fluid as we go on. A little bit about me, as this is the first episode. I'm a career security professional, more than 30 years. Once I get past 30, I kind of just, I'm not going to say how many more extra, but I would say cresting 40 nearly as well as we go through this. And specializing predominantly in majority of the time in enterprise security solutions. I'm currently a security consultant working globally on projects, but my foundations come from, the customer side of the business. I was an operational security manager, even prior to that, a military veteran. You might see some shields above my head from my service. But then working through into working for manufacturers in varying different roles, integrators on a national account and global scale. And so that's allowed me to touch every part of the industry. So I'm kind of bringing my security experience to the security experience. And so with that, I kind of add to that, I'm delighted, honored, and excited to introduce my first guest. And thank you, Tim McCreight. Tim is CEO and founder of TaleCraft Security. Tim is a renowned security leader, over 43 years of experience. You carry it well. You don't look anywhere near.
I keep my hair short so you don't see the gray. So yeah.
I have the same modus operandi. And Tim has dedicated his career to advancing the security profession by helping organizations build resilient ESRM-based security programs and mentoring future leaders. And ESRM, for those who are not familiar with that term, is Enterprise Security Risk Management. So we may talk about that as well as we enroll into these different processes. Throughout his career, Tim has served in many senior roles, including Chief Security Officer and Chief Information Security Officer. And I met Tim in one of those roles for about 7 or 8 years ago now. That's when I first met Tim. And his passion is empowered others, led him to establish TaleCraft, which offers practical training, workshops, and online courses to develop the storytelling and leadership skills critical to the success of today's security professionals. As well, sort of after speaker, author, mentor, and Tim actually and I are mentoring the same person, which is funny. We discover we're mentoring the same person by accident. So it's amazing how our lives have crossed already. And giving back also, growing together, vast experience with a unique ability to communicate security concepts in ways that resonate both on a technical and non-technical level. So you can understand why Tim's my first guest.
Yeah.
Tim also hosts his the
Caffeinated Risk. Yeah, Caffeinated Risk.
I think I missed a D off the end. A podcast which is well established, over 45 episodes to date, which is a monthly podcast, for security professionals by security professionals. And also, if you check out Tim on LinkedIn, his resume is more than impressive, and was also the ASIS International Chair or President, which he served a couple of years ago in 2023. So, as I say, you can understand why I invited Tim. So, we've touched so many facets, of what we want to focus on. So, I hope to be as successful as you in the coming months and years as we go forward. So, welcome, Tim.
Well, I'm looking forward to this podcast. Thank you so much for inviting me, and I'm looking forward to listening every 2 weeks now. So, this is going to be awesome. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, no, I've put myself under pressure.
Yeah.
But I've got my next guest lined up. I'm not going to say who it is yet, but I'm excited to have them on as well. So to add to my passion project comments, let's expand where that comes from. So, we were talking earlier about how do you best put this as an analogy, and I think the best way to do it is there are tons of great solution systems providers out there, but often, if you pick the wrong glue to stick something together, or you have the wrong cement, or even if your analogy of like a kitchen, great ingredients, great chef doesn't mean a great meal.
Right.
And sometimes those nuances of what's in between often lead to things not going like as best as we can. So that's kind of where I'm going with this whole security experience podcast. I speak to yourself and many others at many layers. in the industry to really try and pick through that and give people back, the things they may not have thought of, or the ideas that we may not be working on. So, I'm trying to do this unedited, so as best we can, we're going to go through this and we'll go with the flow and comments. So I have my first question to you, Tim.
All right.
And realistically, some of this is to do with obviously your previous experience and roles, but also during your tenure as ASI's international president. Where do you feel about we are with standards? Whether global, local, the stuff you've encountered when we're delivering enterprise security projects. How do you feel, we are, and any comments and suggestions and recommendations you have for where we're going, and maybe you have an insight on what's coming up as well. That would be great.
So a great question, and thanks so much for this. And again, I just want to say thank you and congrats on starting up this podcast. I'm looking forward to it. I think the path that you're that's ahead of you, and the journey that you're going to take, I think we're all going to enjoy watching for the years to come. So thank you for doing this. We need podcasts like this. We need to get more information out there. We need to find that story amongst security professionals so we can keep moving this profession forward. So let's go to your question. From a standards perspective, I have yet to see a globally understood, accepted, enforced, and endorsed standard that works well. And don't get me wrong, ISO's there, others are there that are available that have provide standards. But the difficulty falls in how do I take something that works potentially at a local level and bring it up to a regional level, then a national level, then a global level. That's hard to do. And part of it is, at least in my career, where I found is that it's those subtle, and you nailed it, these subtle differences, the nuances between different organizations where what may work well, let's say, in my province, may not work well in yours. Or there may be some legislative or regulatory requirements that we can use in Canada that we cannot use in the United States, or we would fail miserably if it went over to Europe. So for what I continually bang my head against is, can we just get folks to look at best practices? And then can we take a look at creating potentially the profession of security? So we would have one universally recognized definition of risk, of threat, of how to protect our executives, how to protect my information. What does it mean when I say that I'm providing a level of assurance to an organization? Can we define that? Because we can't right now. Because there is no one globally accepted approach to security. And in some ways that's terrific because we can create that individual approach. In other ways, I continually bang my head. Can you tell me if I'm doing the right thing or not? I guess that's the question that all of us want to answer, right?
And I think that keeps particularly me as a security consultant employed.
Yes, sure, yeah.
But also in that respect, I add to your comments where you talked about layering things, even outside of a province or a state or a region, up to those global layers and the nuances that happen between those areas. Have you had from practical experience, because I know you've worked in various different environments in the petrochemical industry and this, that, and the other, where you may have seen that practically. Do you have anything where you have any kind of works here, doesn't work here examples?
Yeah, I think I've seen probably in critical infrastructure, oil and gas, and power generation. I think that's the closest you've come to something that could be accessible across a region like North America, as an example. And we see that with what we're doing in some of the organizations I've worked in across North America that did support critical infrastructure or oil and gas, etc. So that's close. But when it gets to other areas, the only other one that comes close is finance. And I haven't had a chance to work in a global financial organization, but my understanding when you take a look at how, as I'm about to do this, transfer money across to a contractor who's doing work for me. Awesome. So now I have to do a wire transfer. Okay, great. How do I do this? It's a set standard approach for wiring money from a bank to another bank. Awesome. Yet that's accepted globally because we've put that process in place over decades of practical experience and the requirements to transfer funds between banks. Awesome. We don't have that same approach from a skills or from a qualitative perspective to look at security. We're not there yet. That's my fear, right? I want us to get there because then it's easier for you and I to take a standard that's accepted at a global level and be able to apply it so that it can reduce risk for our clients.
I agree. Do you think right now we're kind of leaning on the supporting ISO standards and regulations that kind of like surround our industry?
Yeah.
If you're looking at, the 11801 for, structured cabling,
Yep.
etc., and, various different others that kind of surround our business.
Yeah. I agree.
It's kind of a cushion to stop us being exposed almost.
It is. I mean, it gives us a level to begin with, right? So I think the ISO framework has been there and has been accepted at that international level for decades. What I'm struggling with, though, is a standard can be created and it's fantastic and it works, but there's no mechanism behind it to enforce the standard. That's the difference, right? So a standard can be if it's applied and if it's, so I've worked in organizations where they were leaning more towards ISO, some were more towards NIST, others looked at other requirements, or they'd look at a different framework. Terrific. But there was no commonality. I couldn't just come back and say, we're using ISO and this is going to be accepted, because NIST could be just as good. CIS could be just as good. That's my concern, is that I always go back to the medical profession as an example. We have one body. It's taken centuries for us to get really good at understanding how the human body works. And we continue to understand the differences in our bodies over time and diseases, etc. But we start with the one body. And then we have a series of requirements to become a doctor. And that can be replicated across the globe. We don't have that here in security, right?
I agree. It's interesting because I was doing a talk and I was invited as on part of the panel. What does it take to be a security consultant? And a hand on heart would go, okay, well, I've got this experience,
yeah,
and this qualification, this certification,
yeah.
But is there a benchmark even for that, right? And that layers into legislation as well. We're both, for those of you who are new to the podcast and new to us, both Tim and I are based in Canada, in Western Canada, but obviously we're talking, this as a global broadcast. That we're also drawing on the facts that in certain areas where even down to technicians and installers are certified or required for certain qualifications, and in certain cases you'll cross a mystical border and they disappear.
Yeah.
It becomes, the wild, wild west.
Yeah.
So we're kind of layering those areas and points as well. If I can bring you back a little bit to where you say those struggles and standards are, what do you think us as an industry needs to do to help champion that? I know it's a big picture. I know you had a very senior role within ASIS, and is that the body to do it? Are we looking at us leaning and petitioning governments, and are we at that stage where we really need to force? I think where we are right now, there's dangers as we get more and more into technology, and there's more and more cyber and more ESRM that you're dealing with layered into these systems and solutions, that it's an accident waiting to happen on a global scale.
Yeah, and I agree. That's a really good point. So, I go back to this idea of what drives me, and one, what's upset me in this past little while that actually drove me to do some action. And part of it was every time I would see a breach or an incident or event, a majority of times the people who were the talking heads on the media aren't professionals that you and I would know or recognize or have the same background or experience. So that one really annoyed me. And then when you take a look at, again on media, I'll pick on media again. If someone's standing up and representing a medical opinion and have a doctor's in front of them, a Dr. Smith, it's accepted then that that's a medical opinion. Yet anybody could stand in front, to your point, can stand up in front of a screen and say, declare themselves as a security professional and get airtime to talk about a particular event or incident. So you're right. I think we are at this point where it is dangerous things can happen in the future. What do we need to do to change it? So that's why this past little while I got annoyed at this and decided to take this on as a personal task. And within the Canadian legislative framework, I'm working with a team of security professionals to develop the actual, fingers crossed, a federally recognized association or organization that could then generate a federally recognized professional designation for security professionals across Canada.
Wonderful. Are you able to share any more of that? Is this all now secret tied up?
Well, it was secret for a little while. Yeah, it was secret, but not anymore though, because now it isn't anymore, right? So yeah.
But before I ask you to expand on that, I think as well that often it takes, somebody needs to break the ice first, break the barrier first, and also have a foundation to base their standards on. So I'm excited to hear more about this, because sometimes they say, we need to do it like this. Nobody likes to reinvent the wheel or have to do it again. Obviously, there's local, requirements and needs. But a template and a foundation is huge. So if you could expand on that, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've actually looked at a couple of different organizations that fall within this same categorization. Here in Alberta, we have APEGA, which is the association that actually identifies engineers across Alberta and provides them the right to operate, or the opportunity to operate underneath APEGA. So as an example, if I'm helping engineer a bridge across a highway as an engineer in Alberta, I'll have my right to operate, or my stamp from APEGA. So every time I put that on a plan, I'm standing behind that as the engineer who's qualified the work and who stands behind their calculations for the span of the bridge. Awesome. So we looked at what APEGA has created. We looked at KIPS as well, the Canadian Information Processing Society. And they've been a federally recognized society that generates a post-nominal, an ISP, an information secure, like a information systems professional designation. And that's been in place since the 80s. So we took a look at both, looked at their charters, their bylaws, their requirements, etc. And again, I'm no original code person, so I'm borrowing from some fantastic information that's been available before. And that's what kind of struck our conversations this last year, has been, well, we can't just, if we're going to do this, we can't start from scratch, and we're not. So we have some amazing resources that we're calling upon. We've got friends in government who are helping us move this forward as well. And now we actually have legal counsel who has worked with these types of scenarios in the past, who's going to work with us to establish what the organizational structure looks like, the governance model, etc., and then build it from there.
Fantastic. And that was completely unscripted. I didn't even know that was coming when we were having this conversation and we lined this meeting up. So
yeah.
So it's a beautiful conversation, and I don't want to kind of labor a lot on standards, but as you're going through this process of creating standardization, how do you feel looking at it? Obviously, it's in a fledgling state, and you're pushing through these legal parameters. That how professionals who are then either working at a consultative level right down to delivering solutions like integrators and manufacturers will have to change their track or change their direction to meet what's potential new legislation.
Yeah, there is that opportunity if it go, and that'll be down the road, right? That's probably going to occur well past when I retire, which would be terrific to leave that legacy behind. But how we're envisioning right now with the designation and creating what we hope is the body of knowledge is you would come forward to this association when you've reached a certain point within your career, and that could be to your point, after many years military service and doing your own consulting. If you've received a bachelor or master's degree in some type of security profession or professional degree program, do you have your CPP, your CISSP, your CISA, a security certification backed by a number of years of experience? Then it would be coming forward to the group or to the body that would govern the designation, and then you would be presenting your body of knowledge in a board interview, answering questions from a group of peers.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, similar to what you get for the bar exam or what you see from doctors doing their oral examinations. It would be the same. You would be defending the thesis of your career to receive the designation at the far end of it.
Oh, wow. Okay. And how that ripples down then into, project-driven stuff? Are we looking at this legislation purely being at that level to ensure that the advice that's given on a consultative level is of a standard that's certified, if you want to say, even to the point where they're able to stamp drawings if they're not a PNG or whatever.
Yep.
But also then, obviously that ripple effect is beautiful as it goes down into industry and standards, because then you're working with an environment where hopefully going down through enterprise security solutions deliverables,
yep.
You're working with guaranteed knowledge.
That's the hope, right? Is that we start setting a different direction and tone for what's considered a professional approach to security, whether it's installing card access readers right up through to developing enterprise security programs. And there's going to be, over time, there'll be different grades within the profession. There has to be, right? We also want to make sure that we accept different, what you've done in your past, your career path, we'll accept those as well, as physical or cyber. Both will be accepted throughout the program, which is terrific. We'll be layering in the principles of enterprise security risk management because that's one of the foundational pieces for our work moving forward, and we think it needs to be in the profession of security as well. But what it isn't going to be a compulsory requirement. Right? We're not going to operate in security, you have to have this designation. No, not at all. But to operate at this level, to be accepted at this level, to be recognized as a professional in security, I don't know what you, Bill, but have you ever, when you've gone into those HR systems, have you ever found the CPP designation, the CISSP, the CPP, any of those designations in the HR pull downs? I sure do find lawyer,
Yeah.
doctor, etc., engineer. What I want is that 3 letters that represents us as security professionals in that HR drop down to recognize us as a professional. That to get to that point. But it also means the flip side of doing all this work, you're also accountable for it. So if you provide information that is detrimental to your client, or if you provide and your information is incorrect, incomplete, or causes your client some type of threat to be realized, you can be held accountable to it, just like a doctor, just like a lawyer, just like an engineer. And it should be. The flip side of being recognized as a professional means you stand behind your work as a professional.
In my current role, I document everything.
Absolutely, yes, sir. I do the same. I save everything, right? Like I've got a OneNote and OneDrive just for stuff I'm working on. But we have to, right? Because we have to demonstrate the path that you and I have taken in our careers. But more importantly, our decision process to get to this recommendation for this control. Absolutely. But all we're asking now is to take that to the next level up, is to be able to defend the selection of the control.
If I take a sidebar on that portion before I come back to an additional question regarding standards, is that what many people don't realize, particularly on the consultative level, is that we're held accountable for our decisions in certain cases for many years in the future.
Yes, sir.
And so the decisions we're making are based upon not just now but in the future, but also that's why the documentation is key. I've had examples where several years after a project's finished, all the leaders have changed on site.
Yep.
They've said, well, why have you done this? This is wrong, or this is different.
Yeah.
And they're demanding change, and you have to then show documentation. Oh, no, your predecessors agreed to this being this way. And that,
absolutely.
Data is king.
Yep, absolutely. And I agree with you.
So I always draw that point together, because when people are asking, why do we document this? Why don't do this anecdotally? Send me a message, send me an email, have it minuted, have it noted. It's going to protect everybody in that sphere, because nobody wants. Imagine then going back, if you're the integrator, who's then the person who's going to have to deliver that change, at probably their cost.
Absolutely.
You don't want that to happen for them either.
You betcha. And it's just
back into this.
Yeah, it's just churn, right? It's just churn. And this way, what you're doing, and I love what you're doing, because what it does is it demonstrates to other professionals, you have to document this, because you're also creating the story from the beginning of the project through to the end of the project. But within it, there's going to be iterations. You bring up a great point. Staff changes to a facility or to a site. All of a sudden, it's foreign and new to these folks, and they're going to immediately assume it's incorrect. No, it's not.
I also, again, here's another adjunct to that before I come back to the question. But also what's really, really important in that respect as well is sometimes to ask the questions that nobody else will ask.
Right.
Even if it's, I love to be the situation where you're asking the dumb question in the room. Many people don't want to put their hand in the air. I'm always glad to look stupid to get the clarification. I don't mind doing that at all. But also then, if there's a grey area and we're in an environment where unfortunately now, well, you didn't say no, so I said yes. So I'd rather go in and say, can you confirm this is no?
Correct. Yep.
And can you document it? And we go fine and we move on. So if somebody comes back, well, you never said. Well, here we did.
Yep.
So again, it's asking those questions and being aware of that 50,000 foot view of these enterprise projects, that sometimes what's said is the dangerous, rolling ball like in Indiana Jones. That's that's okay.
Someone's going to Google this anyway. You'll be fine.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. It's the original image.
Yeah, the original.
But I come back to your statements requirements and your requirement for almost like a board certified, recognized, challenged across the board at that level. The ripple effect from that, I would hope, then would come down through, those people who are, aspiring to be at that level, who are designers, and also down to the guys and girls on the street who are installing the systems.
Absolutely.
The technicians, the standards in there as well. So what are your thoughts there? Because again, even we're in two different provinces in Canada, and the rules and regulations for even those installing alarm systems, intrusion systems, is polar opposite.
Correct.
So what are your thoughts on that as we take that standards down, if you want to say, right to the root of the organization, to the people who really matter, the people who are installing it, who are turning the drivers, who are making the systems go in,
Yep.
seamlessly, and have a passion for what they do.
Yeah, agreed. And I think that's where we really need to start looking at things across borders. So I think that we're, at least in the Canadian example, I'll pick on us just because this is home for us. In the Canadian example, how hard would it be to get together provincial representation to look at just what you talked about, Bill? Look, as I'm installing X, we need to meet this requirement. And you need to be able to demonstrate that the product is working effectively, efficiently, the control's active. Here's the results that you have to obtain to get sign off that it's been installed appropriately. I think that would be terrific, right? Because you and I both know we see that with plumbers and electricians. So why can't we see that from security systems? Like when the electrician, like a Red Seal electrician, comes into my home and does any work on my home, before he even touches that panel, he has to file for the permit. Yet we don't have the same structure within the integration perspective where I'm putting in a brand new camera or a brand new card access system. And you and I have both seen where not every company will apply the same level of due diligence that others do. That's a politically correct way of putting it. So again, it's because we don't have a mechanism that enforces that level of standard across implementation or putting it in place or testing it, making sure the control is efficient and effective. And before you walk away, have you tested the control, demonstrated that it's effective, stored the results, walked away from that installation, moved to the next one. We don't have that right now. That's the kind of depth that we need to get to.
I couldn't agree with you more. That's going to be a snapshot out of this podcast to talk about, as well as you revealing stuff, which is going to be cool. But on the top of that, Tim, one of the things that I found as well is that I talked earlier about the ISO stuff and the surrounding standards. Mm-hmm. Part of getting to that layer of expertise, if you want, and professionalism. I'm not saying that there's a ton of fantastic enterprise level integrators out there who have, some of their technicians are the smartest guy in the room, the smartest girl in the room.
Absolutely.
Right? Yep. And you have those, but obviously that layers through, and it's not always the case. Maybe that might be a branch by branch cases or a case, but again, getting to that level where we have that layering, almost like journeyman in a situation where you go through formal apprenticeship and standards, because in the same way, I've seen on projects where. Going back to the ISO standards for cabling infrastructure, for instance, that ripples into the installation of video cameras and IP-based solutions for things like bend radius of cabling and how you actually install things outside. And then you see some who are, they've listened, they've learned, they've educated themselves,
right.
And without even saying anything, they've augmented their design principles to meet those standards that support their systems.
Right.
And others are doing it the same way they've done for 20 years.
Yep.
And you end up having to pull them apart and say, actually, WTF?
Yeah,
right? This needs to change, because mentioned in most people's specifications, or at least mine, we're referencing those standards, and it's making sure that there are layers and levels within those organizations to do that and check and balance that as well. But we try and get ahead of that as a consultant to say, look at this, check this,
right.
This is what we're looking for, this is what we're checking. But going back to your point is then it needs to be much more diligent pushing through, so that those groups, you say, I'm not going to stand behind a journeyman plumber and tell them to do their job.
Absolutely.
But a lot of people will stand behind a technician and tell them to do their job, or try to.
Agreed. And do you know what part of it too is, and this is, it's interesting to see some of the parallels, because in what if across the security industry, to change it from industry to profession, right? So you bring up great points. The journeyman program would be amazing to see applied within these types of features, or probably these types of roles within security, is that you can come into a journeyman program or a Red Seal program for installation, implementation of security controls. Awesome. Then that way, the ISO requirements, as if we're using that as one of the standards, would be then enforced across an entire class of individuals coming out. So they would actually, that's the first thing they would use when they start building out their, the implementation of a control. Perfect. What it does is it changes the buyer's perception of a solution. It raises the professionalism, and it forces it actually forces clientele to look at things differently. Because right now, I still see organizations that will find the least expensive route to put in security controls. And you get exactly what you pay for, but it becomes a compliance exercise. Do you have a control on the door? Yep, check. Do you have a camera? Yep, check. Well, the camera's watching nothing, or it fades out after 7 days, or you've got maybe 3 days of storage and your problem occurred a week ago. Well, you're out of luck. Or the control only works up until the technician walks away, and then the first cold snap, the cable freezes, and the door doesn't lock. Awesome, great. All of those could be removed if people looked at security as a way to enable the business. So again, enterprise security risk management. The marketplace changed to not go for the lowest bid. I bring this up all the time. Would you go with the cheapest doctor to get a solution for your health?
Yeah.
I'll just let everyone think on that.
It's like
one.
you were reading my mind there, Tim. It's like my next question was, how do you think that's going to impact people's perception with price?
I agree. Don't get me wrong. It's gonna force people to pay a bit more. I get that. But the control and the quality of the control, the quality of the workmanship, raising the level of, I got my brother to install my plumbing versus I got a Red Seal plumber to install it. One I can get insurance for. Mm-hmm. The other one, not so much. So what if we also talk to insurance brokers and talk to them about, if this was created, what would it do to lower the cost of premiums for a company that was applying for insurance based on the security controls that you have in place today? Would that alter the insurance landscape? Maybe.
Agreed. And I think that layers through not only, as you're saying, I think the plumber's a good analogy here because, you're going to have a certain person come in if you've got a brand new building, a house or a building, that puts a system in, but you're also going to have returns. Yep. You get a leak or you decide you want to have an outside, tap or whatever, or faucet.
Absolutely. Yep.
And you bring somebody in or there's a problem or, then you need that same standard to be applied. And what I've seen as well, and I'm sure you have, that sometimes the standard is met, and this is one of the things that's kind of the passion project for me and has me kind of shaking and why I'm doing this, is sometimes as well, it's not just the deliverable of the solution and everybody gets signed off and sealed and stamped, it's then how it's managed and added onto and changed and developed and evolved as technology evolves over. Some people look at it and go, okay, well, it's a solution, it's done now, I don't have to think about it. And we all know that is not the case.
Right.
Whether that be your policies and procedures, your standard solutions and systems. And I've been to sites, I remember, I'm deliberately not drawing on anything from my current tenure or my current client base. But I remember being on a site in the UK, which we were taking over, and everything worked until it didn't. And then massive enterprise site, global identified corporate headquarters.
Wow.
We walked into the room where the security equipment was. Somebody, and I'm dating myself, like Form C relays. Somebody had actually put a couple of Form C relays in an enclosure with a little post-it note on the front: "Do not close. This gets hot."
Oh my God.
On the lid.
Wow.
And another one when you opened a cabinet, which is a networked expander unit for multiple controllers. I now know that they'll all be IP, but back then they're all 232.485 communications. If you had to try and close the door and leave the refrigerator light on to keep the system working, because it was a spaghetti. It was like your favorite Italian grandma's spaghetti.
Oh my God! Wow.
Inside the can.
Wow.
So again, and as that point where probably originally it was beautiful, installed and checked and commissioned and tested by consultants and levels and standards to sign off a job, and then week after week, month after month, year after year, it gets added to, changed, maybe by different vendors, different suppliers, different installers, different standards, probably at the lowest price.
Fair. Fair. Yep.
And nobody's checking the work behind, because all they see is the front end. Is the camera working? Is the alarm working? Is the reader working? Is the door working? Yes. But the back end stuff is a mess. And I think, going back to your point, if we have that regulation and that standard and that deliverable, and that doesn't mean that there aren't great people out there doing great work.
No, absolutely not.
But we have to then anticipate, but because it's a bit of a wild, wild west, there are others that are not.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. And as you were describing this situation, I thought of how when you're building a home, your plans have to be submitted for review and approval. It's an architect, right? An actual professional architect that creates the plans and sends them in. And the difference between the as-built and the submitted can be wildly different. But at the, to your point, I need to add on to my house. I will go back to my plans and identify where the safest place is to begin the construction of a new wing to my home. Awesome. But it's because you brought up the best point ever, is I start with a set of plans that have been reviewed and approved and follow a standard. right? It's accepted, it's signed off. It's now that's an enforceable document when you go to the job site to build out that home. When I come back and I want to put a new section to my home, I go back to those original plans. I compare them against the as-built, and then I can start building out. I don't just start digging a hole beside one part of the house and hope for the best, where I think that's what that can was. I'm just going to shove some wire in there, cross my fingers, and as long as you don't jiggle it when you're closing it, it's going to keep working. We can't have that. But we still face that. We still see that in the security industry, and when we're trying to get to that profession, we don't think, or we're not looking 5, 10, 15 years down the road, where other professions do.
Yeah, and I'll add to that as well, and this is a little selfish promotion, is that as we go through episodes, as I mentioned, I'm going to be speaking to people who are working as technicians, as integrators in various different layers within the enterprise world to discuss these sort of things, their ideas, what they're bringing forward, because of course, everybody should be engaged in making those decisions and standards. Because in the same way that when I talk about sometimes an end user will receive a system sight unseen that's been picked by somebody else, and at the end of the day they go, well, this doesn't meet anything that I need to do. Right?
Agreed.
Practically. To deliver it does the basics, but it doesn't enhance my business. And there are layers too as well, where speaking to operational teams and integrators, where you turn up on site and they'll say, well, okay, we're going to put this in, but I can tell you now it's not going to work the way you want it to.
Isn't that frightening when they actually, that's what scares me, is that I'm going to look at the flip side of this as well. What if we actually bring in the vendors and the manufacturers of the equipment, not as much to influence the profession itself, but to listen to what the profession needs? So instead of, like, have you ever gone to, and I'll bring up the medical profession again. I don't know of many medical conferences or much that works within, the medical profession, where the X-ray company who builds the X-ray machines is telling the profession of medicine what to do.
Yes.
Personally, I think it's the other way around. Doctors are asking manufacturers and are funding different initiatives to create a better approach to find X. Why can't we do that? Why can't we go back to those who are building those pieces of equipment and those controls that protect our environments? Why can't we have that dialogue with them to create a better mousetrap, and we'll help you build it or design it?
Exactly, and even if you're looking at on the consultative world, when we're looking at requesting bidders to support a project, knowing what they do and how they work and what their expertise is and where their spread is, really helps you then pick the right vendors for the client.
Yeah.
But also tied into that, I had a meeting just last night with a manufacturer, discussing new features. Us as a profession have to stay current, and it's tough. We're getting overloaded with so much data and so much information, but we also need to lean on those manufacturers and those professionals and those experts in the installation field, in the integrators field, to help us with best practice. I can't be the deep knowledge master of every single access control video and intrusion solution, and you tie in fence detection and drone detection and all the other nuances of integration, single pane of glass, everything that you can do within an enterprise level solution. So we need to then lean on those people and have those help give us advice.
Absolutely.
I couldn't agree more. With that being said, one of the things I also wanted to ask you was in relation to the systems that we mentioned. I mentioned before that the text says, well, that's going to work here.
Yeah.
That's not going to do what you think it's going to do.
Yeah, exactly.
How do you go about, or how have you gone about kind of making those choices? Yeah, I know you from days at Calgary, and obviously you're in different roles and different responsibilities, and this is good because I think integrators and manufacturers need from people who were former clients and customers, and I'm the same way as to kind of what they're looking for.
Yeah.
What do you think is the most important thing for them to do to win your business when you were in that role? What do you think is the most important thing to do?
Yeah, good question. I mean, when I was on the purchasing side of the house, the solutions I was looking at, whether it was physical or cyber, I kind of had the same approach, is that I had the full laundry list of things I wanted and needed and would love to have. And then I knew practically speaking, about 2/3 of that list gets chopped, right? Because now I had to figure out what can I actually get to put into place that's going to provide me at least the first 3 or 4 primary controls that are going to reduce the risk. That's really what I had to focus on. The rest, I started grading things on interoperability with my current environment because that was key. I lost count of how many times in my career I would buy a solution and it ended up being an orphan because it was standalone and I couldn't use it for anything else. It was fantastic for the one controller provided, but it was so difficult to draw data from there and use that data for a holistic risk assessment that it became complicated. So my whole life, at least in the last part of my career, has been get rid of the complications. I'm trying to do things sock puppet and crayon simple. Can I get it to that space? So I've explained to vendors over the years, look, I need this box, this thing, this solution to work with these other platforms as well. Can you? And can you do it without me having to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars building an integration point between these? Can you show me how this can share data natively with another solution? So that's some of the criteria I've used in the past little while to grade solutions, is that I want to find something that if I can find something that's interoperable, that can share information, that can still reduce the risk, it may not be 100% of what I'm looking for. But if I get 75 to 80% with that level of interoperability, the ability to use the data coming out of our solution to another solution and to help me create that holistic picture of risk, I'll buy that over something that does what I need it to do exactly 100% of the time, but it's a standalone solution. I'll take the integrated solution at 80%, 100% of the time.
Wonderful. And it's interesting because I can see, following other, influencers and people talking with social commentary on access control and video solutions, you're seeing lots of media from those groups about the user experience and increasing it. We all have smartphones now that we can basically work most of it out ourselves.
Yes.
Most of the time.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Depends. Yeah. It depends. Yeah.
I'm lucky enough to have a 16-year-old son who can then maybe point me in the right direction on certain items, even though I've been a tech guy for the longest time.
See, my dogs aren't helping me at all with that yet. I got no help with my dogs at all on that, right? So, yeah.
So let me add a layer to that in your role and what you're doing and how you're trying to educate and support your client base.
Yep.
We are now. So you've picked your optimum solution. You're 80% providing 100%. The analogy, the crayons on the sock puppet.
Yep.
Solution that is enterprise and is certified, and we're there.
Yep.
And it's providing bucket loads of metadata. Right? Yep. So how are you seeing the direction of the industry towards aggregating that?
Yeah.
For your use and for other use, it's a business tool.
Yeah. It is. And I think you hit on a really, really interesting point that we weren't looking at 10 years ago, but we're being asked to look at it now, particularly with the advent of AI and ML and the collection of large data sets and large, LLMs. So for me, as I'm seeing clients that we're working with that are starting to collect that data, they're now using those data, that data to create decision points and to understand what's the risk. And I think that's amazing. A personal thing here within TaleCraft, what we're doing now is I'm a pack rat. Like I save stuff from most of my career. And I've got almost 40 years worth of a data set that I'm going to be putting into our own private LLM. And we're going to be using that as one of our artificial intelligence engines to draw insights, thoughts, comments, report sections, etc., out of what I've built plus the other contractors that I'm working with. So we're using our own knowledge and our own information to build up our own AI engine that we can help clients with our experience and expertise and give it back. But what do I do with all the metadata? If I work well with the data, I have a chance to demonstrate the efficacy of the control, the value that the control brings, and can I link the control statement, why I put the control in place in the first place, to how I support the business objective. If I can draw that straight line every time with a control, the chances of me getting in front of the budget and finance committee and getting a favorable response increases over time.
And I think that's a great place to stop, because we could keep talking forever and ever. But the great place to stop, if you talk about value, it returns to value. As you increase standards, but you increase quality and you increase, the results that can be transferable, return on investment, then you hope the systems pay for themselves.
Absolutely.
And in many different cases I've seen that, particularly with analytics, some of that metadata is being fed back to cities and municipalities, around the world, and they're buying it.
Absolutely.
So on top of your own focal use. So Tim, thank you so much. That was fantastic. Thank you again for your passion and your energy. And as I said, we could go on all day. I look forward to maybe doing this again with you in the future. I think already there was certain points in there we could almost have an episode on probably each of our subject topic points individually as we go forward. So really, really thank you again, Tim. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you for your time.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. I appreciate it.
So I'd like to kind of, as we wrap up the first episode, again, I return to my notes so I don't miss anything as I go forward. So if you or anybody you know would like to be involved in future episodes, you'd like to recommend somebody, have questions or areas you'd like the show to focus on or on delivering enterprise security solutions, feel free to message me directly at bill.danieltse@gmail.com. Please subscribe with your local favorite media platform, and please also follow me personally at the Security Experience Group on LinkedIn too. I'll also be then posting all of Tim's information in the same way, his website and his information on his podcast and other media. Tim, thank you again. Again, for being my first guest, thank you so much, and joining me on the Security Experience.
Thank you. It was an honor. Thank you.
Okay. Bye for now, everybody. See you in a few weeks.